We've all been there. Someone drops a religious claim into a conversation, and suddenly it feels like you're walking through a minefield. You don't want to nod along, but you also don't want to ignite a full-blown argument that drains your energy. And here's the kicker. Most of the time, these arguments aren't really about truth at all. They're about identity. When someone defends their faith, they're not just defending an idea. They're protecting their entire sense of self, family traditions, a promise of purpose, maybe even their insurance policy for the afterlife. That's why quoting facts or science rarely changes minds. It's not stupidity, it's psychology. Beliefs tied to belonging don't crumble just because you throw evidence at them. So, the real question is, how do you handle religious arguments without losing your time, your patience, or your sanity? In this video, I'll show you. We're going to unpack the most common tactics people use: design, first cause, morality, miracles, and reveal the simple questions that disarm them every time. You'll see why silence can be more powerful than shouting, and why the strongest position is not certainty but clarity. Because the goal isn't to win arguments. It's to protect your peace, expose weak claims, and plant seeds of doubt that grow long after the conversation ends. Identity over truth. Here's the thing. When you argue with someone about religion, you might think you're debating facts, science, history, logic. It feels like that's what's on the table. But in reality, most religious arguments aren't about truth at all. They're about identity. When someone defends their faith, they're not just talking about an idea. They're defending who they are. Their religion is tied to family, childhood memories, culture, their sense of meaning, and often their ticket to an afterlife. In other words, it's personal. So when you challenge the belief, they feel like you're challenging them. That's why facts alone usually bounce off. It's not that people are stupid. It's that beliefs tied to belonging and security don't dissolve under data. Imagine telling someone their entire family tradition or worldview is wrong. Of course they'll resist. So, if you've ever wondered why religious debates feel like you're running in circles, this is why. It's not about evidence. It's about identity. And once you understand that, you can approach these conversations differently. Instead of trying to bulldoze someone with facts, you can recognize the emotional layer underneath. Because here's the secret. The moment you stop treating it like a math problem and start seeing it as identity protection, you'll know how to respond without wasting hours arguing past each other. Ask questions instead of attacking. So, if facts alone won't crack religious arguments, what actually works? One of the most powerful tools is surprisingly simple: asking questions. Not sarcastic jabs like, "Do you really believe that nonsense?" But calm, curious questions. Why do you believe that? What do you mean by that exactly? How did you come to that conclusion? These kinds of questions shift the whole dynamic. Instead of a debate, two sides throwing punches, it becomes a conversation. You're not attacking. You're inviting them to think out loud, maybe for the first time. Here's the truth. Many religious believers have never been asked why. They were taught as children, praised for repeating the answers, warned not to doubt. So when you ask a gentle, honest question, you create silence, space for reflection. And silence is more powerful than you think. If they have no answer, they feel the gap. If they give an answer, it often reveals assumptions they've never examined. Either way, the conversation slows down, and you've sidestepped the defensive wall. Remember, you don't need to prove them wrong in one conversation. Your goal is to introduce cracks of doubt, not hammer the whole structure at once. Asking questions lets them wrestle with their own beliefs, without you being the enemy. Debunking common arguments. Once a religious person moves past quoting scripture, they often reach for familiar proofs. The design argument, the first cause argument, the morality argument. Let's break them down quickly. The design argument claims the universe is so complex, it must have had a designer. Sounds persuasive, until you look closer. Complexity doesn't always mean intention. Snowflakes, crystals, even galaxies form naturally through physics. Evolution explains life's complexity without needing an architect. And if the universe is designed, why is it so messy, extinctions, birth defects, flaws everywhere? That's not intelligent design, that's trial and error. The first cause argument says everything must have a cause, so the universe must have been created by God. But here's the flaw. If everything needs a cause, then who caused God? If something can exist without a cause, why stop at God? Why not just the universe itself? Adding a creator just multiplies the mystery. The morality argument insists we can't have right and wrong without God. But morality shifts across cultures and time. Slavery was once moral, holy wars were once justified. Clearly, morality didn't come from one eternal lawgiver. It's rooted in empathy, cooperation, and survival. Our human need to live together without destroying each other. These arguments sound powerful when unexamined, but the moment you slow them down, ask questions, and poke gently, they unravel. And once they unravel, believers often retreat to the last line of defense: faith, comfort versus reality. Here's a secret about most religious arguments. They're not really about evidence. They're about comfort. Think about it. Religion promises that your life has a plan, that suffering has meaning, and that death isn't really the end. That's incredibly appealing. So when you challenge someone's belief, you're not just questioning a story, they feel like you're pulling away their safety net. That's why blunt logic often backfires. Not because your point is wrong, but because it leaves them with nothing to replace it. Imagine someone tearing down your house without offering a place to stay. Even if the house was crumbling, you'd cling to it. This is why people double down on shaky arguments. They're not defending logic, they're defending comfort. And unless you recognize that, you'll feel like you're debating in circles forever. So what's the alternative? Instead of just poking holes, you can offer something better. Not another fairy tale, but honesty. The freedom to say, I don't know, without guilt. The idea that life doesn't need a divine script to be meaningful. That morality, love, and purpose can stand on their own. When you do that, you're not just taking away a belief. You're replacing fear with clarity. And clarity, in the long run, is far more comforting than a story that only works if you never question it. Faith, feelings, and personal experience. At some point, every religious conversation hits the wall of faith. When arguments about design or morality fail, people often retreat to, I just know, I feel God in my heart. Here's the problem. Feelings aren't facts. People feel all sorts of things. Love, fear, déjà vu, awe, guilt. They feel their dead relatives are watching over them. They feel certain rituals bring good luck, but none of those feelings prove reality. If truth were decided by feelings, then every contradictory belief, from Christianity to Hinduism to astrology, would all be equally valid, and clearly, they can't all be true at once. Faith is basically belief without evidence, or even belief in spite of evidence. That's not strength. It's admitting, I believe because I want to. And while that might be emotionally satisfying, it's not an argument. Personal experience falls into the same trap. People confuse powerful emotions with proof. But anecdotes aren't data. If someone says, I know God healed me, we can respect their sincerity, but it's still not evidence. Many others pray and don't get healed. That inconsistency shows it's not divine power, it's probability, coincidence, or medicine. The key is this. Faith and feelings might feel unshakable to a believer, but they don't carry weight outside their circle. And reminding someone gently of that can reveal just how fragile their strongest defense really island. Miracles and probability. Miracles get brought up a lot in religious debates. Someone survives a car crash. A disease suddenly goes into remission. A prayer seems answered. And it's framed as proof. See? God did this. But here's the part almost nobody talks about: statistics. Unlikely things happen all the time. If you flip a coin 1,000 times, you'll eventually get a crazy streak of heads in a row. If millions of people pray every day, the odds guarantee that sometimes something will line up by chance. We notice the hits and ignore the misses. People share the story of the cancer patient who survived after prayer, but not the thousands who prayed and died anyway. That's called confirmation bias, remembering the exceptions and forgetting the rule. And if miracles were really proof of divine power, wouldn't we see consistency? Specific prayers answered, amputated limbs regrown, tragedies prevented on command? Instead, Miracles always look exactly like rare natural events or coincidences dressed up with religious language. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Calling something a miracle doesn't explain it, it just labels it. Probability already accounts for the rare, shocking, unlikely events. The only reason they feel supernatural is because we humans love stories. So the next time someone says, "That was a miracle," the real question is, was it supernatural or just statistics doing what statistics always do? The fear tactic. What if you're wrong? When logic fails, fear often steps in. One of the most common religious arguments isn't really an argument at all. It's a scare tactic. But what if you're wrong? What if hell is real? On the surface, it sounds like a checkmate. Why risk eternal punishment? But let's flip it around. What if they're wrong? What if they've built their entire life on an illusion? What if they've wasted years worshiping an idea that never existed? The fear cuts both ways. Besides, fear is not evidence. Imagine if someone told you, "Believe in my invisible dragon, or it will burn you forever after death." The threat itself doesn't make the dragon real. It just tries to bully you into belief. This argument also exposes something deeper. Religion often survives not because it proves truth, but because it silences doubt with fear. People are taught that questioning is dangerous, even damnable. That's not an honest search for truth. That's psychological control. And here's the thing. If a belief system needs threats to keep people inside it, what does that say about its credibility? Real truth doesn't need to scare you into submission. It can stand on its own. So the next time you hear, "What if you're wrong?" remember, it's not a question about reality. It's a reflection of fear. And fear is the weakest foundation for belief. The addiction to certainty. One of the most powerful reasons religion clings so tightly isn't evidence, it's certainty. Faith offers answers to the biggest, scariest questions. Why are we here? What happens when we die? Is there a plan? And instead of, "We don't know," religion gives a script, neat, complete, and unquestionable. That certainty is addictive. It silences doubt. It promises that nothing is random, that someone's in control, that suffering has meaning. For people facing loss or fear, that's incredibly comforting. But here's the catch. Comfort isn't the same as truth. Certainty doesn't make something real, it just makes it feel real. A person can be absolutely certain the earth is flat, or that they'll win the lottery tomorrow, and still be wrong. Yet in religion, certainty is treated as a virtue. The stronger the belief, the holier the person. But think about it. If a belief collapses the moment you ask for evidence, how strong is it really? A real truth doesn't fear questions. It doesn't need to punish doubt. It welcomes scrutiny. Because scrutiny only makes it stronger. Faith, on the other hand, demands certainty in spite of uncertainty. It's like living in a house with cracks in the walls but refusing to look because you're afraid the whole thing might fall apart. That's not strength, that's denial. And the irony? Letting go of false certainty can feel scary at first, but it's the first step toward real clarity. The burden of proof. Here's a trap people fall into all the time in religious debates. Suddenly it feels like you're the one on trial. Someone says, "You can't prove God doesn't exist." And just like that, the burden of proof is flipped. But that's not how it works. If I tell you there's a dragon in my garage, it's not your job to prove me wrong. It's my job to prove I'm right. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Religion often gets a free pass here. People act like faith is just another worldview, and skepticism has to defend itself. But skepticism isn't a belief system, it's a method. It doesn't say, "There is no God." It says, "Show me evidence, and I'll believe." That's not arrogance, that's intellectual honesty. And here's something important. You can't disprove vague, unfalsifiable ideas. You can't disprove invisible unicorns, time-traveling aliens, or a God who only reveals himself in private feelings. The fact that something can't be disproven doesn't make it true, it makes it meaningless as evidence. So the next time someone tries to put the burden of proof on you, remember, asking for evidence isn't dodging the question, it's the foundation of rational thought. The person making the claim carries the responsibility to back it up. And if they can't, That silence says more than any argument you could make. The tactics to watch for. Not every religious debate is straightforward. Some people don't even realize they're using rhetorical tricks to protect their beliefs. 3 of the most common are goalpost shifting, the Gish Gallop, and special pleading. Goalpost shifting happens when you address one claim, and the person immediately changes the terms. You refute their point about creation, and suddenly they're talking about morality. It's like chasing a moving target. You'll never hit it. The Gish Gallop is when someone throws out a rapid-fire list of claims, hoping you can't respond to all of them. It creates the illusion of strength through sheer volume, not actual evidence. The best way to counter it? Slow down. Pick one claim. Examine it deeply. Special pleading is when religious claims are given exceptions that nothing else would get. For example, everything needs a cause except God. Or, this miracle proves my faith, but other religions' miracles are fake. That's not logic. That's favoritism. Recognizing these tactics doesn't mean you have to get angry. It just means you don't get tricked into playing on unfair terms. Once you see them, you can calmly bring the conversation back to solid ground. Because at the end of the day, an argument that only works by shifting, flooding, or making exceptions isn't really an argument at all. It's just smoke, and you don't have to chase smoke. Seeds of doubt. When most people think about debating religion, they imagine trading arguments back and forth like a tennis match. But sometimes, the most effective move isn't swinging harder, it's stepping back. Asking a calm question and then letting silence hang can be more powerful than any counter-argument. Try something simple. Why do you believe that? Or, what evidence would change your mind? These aren't attacks, they're invitations. And often, they're questions believers have never actually asked themselves. Here's the secret. Most religious faith isn't built on deep reflection. It's inherited, rewarded, and protected from scrutiny. When you introduce even a sliver of curiosity, it can feel like opening a window in a room that's been sealed for years. The air changes. And that's where doubt grows, not in hostile debates, but in quiet moments after the conversation is over. Someone replaying your question in their head while they're alone. Someone realizing their answers felt rehearsed, not real. The truth is, you don't have to win on the spot. You're not planting a tree, you're planting a seed. Seeds take time. They sit in the dark before they grow. So instead of feeling pressure to destroy every argument, remember this: a single honest question, delivered with calm curiosity, can echo far longer than a memorized rebuttal. Morality without God. One of the most common religious claims is, without God, there is no morality. At first, it sounds convincing, like humans would run wild without a divine rulebook. But history and everyday life tell a very different story. If morality truly came from holy texts, then why do moral values shift across time and cultures, even among believers? Ancient scriptures endorse slavery, violence, and punishments we find horrifying today. Yet people eventually rejected those practices, not because God changed, but because humans did. Real morality doesn't come from authority, it comes from empathy, fairness, and the desire to reduce harm. These aren't religious traits, they're human traits. They've evolved through millions of years of living in groups, where cooperation meant survival. And here's the irony. Morality tied to divine command is actually weaker. If good is just whatever God says, then anything, from genocide to oppression, can be justified as obedience. But morality rooted in human well-being is accountable. It has to stand on reason, compassion, and real-world outcomes. That makes it stronger, not weaker. Because it isn't about pleasing an unseen authority, it's about creating a world where people can live with dignity and fairness. So the next time someone claims you can't be moral without religion, remember, morality existed long before Scripture, and it'll exist long after. It doesn't need divine permission, it just needs us. When to walk away. Not every religious argument is worth your energy. Some people aren't looking for a real conversation. They're looking for a sparring match, a chance to preach, or a way to defend their identity at any cost. In those moments, the most powerful move isn't another clever rebuttal, it's walking away. Here's why. Your time and peace of mind are valuable. If someone is shifting goalposts, refusing to engage honestly, or just trying to provoke you. You don't owe them endless explanations. Setting boundaries isn't weakness, it's self-respect. You can say, "I'm happy to discuss if it's respectful and honest, but I'm not here to be preached at." Or even simpler, "This doesn't feel productive, so I'm stepping away." That's not losing. It's choosing not to play a game that was rigged from the start. Remember, not every seed you plant will grow in front of you. Sometimes the most effective thing you can do is leave space. Let them wrestle with their own doubts later, in private. Walking away doesn't close the door forever. It just reminds both of you that your peace matters more than endless debate. And often, that quiet confidence speaks louder than 1,000 counter-arguments. At the end of the day, handling religious arguments isn't about winning. It's about clarity, being steady in what you know, honest about what you don't, and refusing to get dragged into games that waste your energy. Think about it. Religious arguments often rely on emotion, identity, or fear. But reason doesn't need those crutches. When you stay calm, ask real questions, and hold beliefs to the same standard you'd apply anywhere else in life, you're already ahead. You're modeling something many people have never seen, a conversation where doubt isn't dangerous and questions aren't sins. That's the power you bring, not by shouting, not by memorizing a dozen rebuttals, but by standing clear, consistent, and grounded. And sometimes, that quiet strength lingers long after the conversation is over. So remember this: you don't have to fix anyone, you don't have to respond to every claim. Your role is to stay true to your integrity, and trust that clarity, over time, is more persuasive than any sermon. And if you found this video valuable, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next one. Because in our upcoming video, we're going to explore something even trickier: the subtle ways religions borrowed ideas from each other and why almost nobody talks about it. Stay curious, stay calm, and I'll see you in the next one.